Welcome back, everybody, to CreavoCast. How's everybody doing?
Doing very well. How about you, Jake?
I'm doing well. Dragging a little bit today, but it's been a busy week, and I'm trying to wake up, so we'll see how this goes. How about you? How you doing?
You know what they say, just pour extra coffee on it.
I know. Yes, I probably will have a cup of coffee after this. Probably should have had it before. But yeah, absolutely. Caffeine is the key to any solopreneur's life, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. So I had a topic I thought we might discuss today.
Yeah, what do you got?
So, you and I, we collect emails from clients as if, they're keys on a ring. And when a client brings you into their system with an email for their company, you can feel kind of special. You have a direct link to them. And then when you suddenly lose an email, like you found that it was shut off or something, it kind of hurts. So you reach out and you say, "Hey, what's going on? I thought we were good." And they let you know that they review every year their accounts and who's actually doing active work. And I have not worked with them in quite some time, and that they just are looking at cost savings because no email is free. If you're on a Microsoft account, it's probably like $100 to $150 a year. And they audited it. They found that I wasn't doing work with them just because they just didn't have anything for me. So they had to close the account. And it had me thinking, I've done the same recently. And, it's become a topic that I've seen talked about on LinkedIn as well.
So talk about the specific link you had on LinkedIn that you shared with me. Who was it and kind of what they were talking about? Share with us what that is.
Sure. So Shemaine Brown is someone that I met with on Alignable. Alignable is a business-to-business networking platform. It's really just social media. You're not selling directly to people. You are just trying to do a virtual networking so that people become familiar with your product and might refer you. Now, I met with her on one of the virtual networking events, and I was impressed by the depth that she goes to in her virtual assistant business. And she publishes a newsletter twice a month called Campfire Stories Navigation for Your Business. And her issue number 68, which was just posted, is dividing dollars. So the idea is she's reviewing all of her expenses, and she found Adobe Creative Suite, one of the ones that we use every day, wasn't being used by her. So she ended up dropping that. And then she also looked at Alignable and said, that's a cost that is worthwhile for her. And she mentions spending with purpose. Now, I've done this too, and I've got a few comparisons I can make, but I was wondering, do you look at your expenses regularly as well?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think as people, we tend to think about personal budgets and about like how much our groceries is costing us. And if we have a child in a sport, how much are we spending on that? Those kinds of things. And then sometimes as business owners, we get so busy that we don't do those audits and do the same budgeting that we do as our personal life. And so, yeah, I've actually done it on both sides. Found something interesting with that same thing of like losing an email account. We worked with a client who grew to be very, very busy during the pandemic, had a boatload of Zoom accounts because we were doing all of these different trainings. And they did the same thing. They did an audit where they went and said, okay, we don't need 12 Zoom accounts anymore. We can deal with 4 or whatever it ended up being. So it's really interesting to see how companies are doing those things. And it's funny, we, again, as small business or solopreneurs, we tend to get so busy that we forget to do that audit. And it's funny because when we're kind of texting back and forth about doing this topic, the first thing that came to mind, and to be completely clear, this is not an ad, but Rocket Money. What Rocket Money advertises is how they can go in and look at what are all the subscriptions you have. And I always laugh at the number of people that are like, I have 2 DoorDash accounts or I have 2 Netflix accounts. I'm like, I know that happens to people, but I know that doesn't happen to me because I check my bank account at least several times a month to make sure that things are okay. So if I saw that Netflix was coming out several times a month, I'd be like, what's going on there? But I laugh that that's what they do. But they're doing that because they understand that auditing your expenses is a really good way to save money, because we do get into these things where we sign up for something for a year for maybe $1, which I just did that before we got on. And you forget about it at the end of the year, and then it renews for whatever the monthly cost is. So you have to be careful of those things. But like you said, she went in and realized she wasn't using Adobe. And obviously, you and I use Adobe heavily every day. But I've looked at alternatives to say, okay, is there a way I could save money and not be in the Adobe ecosphere. Well, unfortunately, with what I do, it's going to be really hard for me to move out of that. But a perfect example is Canva now owns Affinity, which is a competitor software to Adobe. So you have that option to say, okay, I want to save some money there. Maybe I'll move to that platform. Some other places that I think we need to make sure we audit are domain names. I am a domain name junkie. I have a serious problem, and I buy domains whenever I have an idea. And the problem is they're too cheap to say no. So I buy them, I hold on to them for a year, and I say, okay, did that idea ever come to fruition? Did I ever do anything with it? And at that point, I might say, no, I'm just going to drop it. But I've just always been somebody that's like, okay, I have an idea, go grab that domain before somebody else does. So yeah, I have a problem there. I probably have 35 domains at this point that I'm playing around with. But yeah, like I look at other things, like I've looked at how much is my phone costing me in my business? Is there things that I can do to maybe move to a different carrier that might be cheaper and might be a better place for that? So I think as solopreneurs, we can really get bloated in what we sign up to use and what we're doing. And if we don't do that audit, it's very easy to get to the end of the year and be like, wow, I spent a lot of money on things that I didn't really need to. So those are some of those areas that I could think of off the top of my head that I have done that with. Obviously, streaming services on a personal level, I got to be careful with that because I'm terrible about being that person that signs up for a month and watches something and then cancels it. I know a lot of people that play that game, and I'm horrible at that. I'll sign up, and then 6 months from now, I'll be like, I haven't watched anything on that platform in forever. So again, just like you do it in your personal life, you really got to do it in your business life as well, and make sure that you're not getting bloated expense. And you really should do it every year, but I would recommend doing it more than once a year. What are your plans to do that auditing going forward?
So just to share a simple list of what I've been looking at, just so that people have ideas where to look. Adobe, when you have your Adobe renewal at the end of the year, they say, all right, we're going to re-up you and the price is going to be this. Threaten to cancel. Just do it virtually. Say you're going to cancel. They'll oftentimes come back at you with a half price subscription, just automatically. There's no promo codes, nothing to do. So if you're not going to cancel, but you still need the tool, it's still worth looking at that subscription yearly to see if you can get it for cheaper. Same thing with your phone and cable service, obviously. My cable company, I looked at the bill and I said, why is the rental fee for the modem $30 a month? What are my options? You can actually go and buy a modem, a Wi-Fi modem for about 80 to 150 and have that used just as long as it's compatible with the network. And then you're saving 30 times 12 a year.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I had 3 accounts on my Zoom because that was one of the things that I needed at the time during the pandemic. Now I'm down to 1 and I'm saving 150 there. Box.com is the big one. Recently launched my new site, as you know from last week. I had to migrate my email too. It turns out my migration of the email also included Microsoft's the office storage. I forget, OneDrive. OneDrive is $10 a month included on all that. So now I'm saving $48 a month on Box because they have a minimum of 3 users for the plan that I had with, I needed that much space and that kind of thing. So it's worth looking in all of these niches with software, subscriptions, all these things. And then, don't be the one that updates your computer or phone every year as well. That's entirely unnecessary too.
Well,
So
and speaking of
think
that,
about,
is thinking about the 1 year cost versus the monthly cost. I know when it comes to like car insurance or rental insurance or probably even business insurance, paying it all up front can save you in the long run. And I have a really good friend of mine who constantly bugs me about that. He's like, why do you pay it monthly? It has to do with the way my expenses work and the way my income comes in. But he is a big proponent of pay it all up front. And you could do that with a lot of softwares too. Like you can say, okay, if I can get my web hosting for a year, it's going to cost this, but maybe it's going to cost a little bit more per month if I do it monthly. If you have the opportunities to pay for those things for a year and save the money, try to make sure you budget that for the next year that you get there so that you have that money. So what else were you going to say?
Other places to look is if your business kind of needs a regular cash flow and you have a line of credit, SBA loan, private lending, or a credit card, look at balance transfers as an option. Look at what your options are for lines of credit or SBA loans and shop it around to different banks because some of them have different agreements and different rates and what they're able to lend out. Because debt can become a big expense at the end of the year when you're looking at your profitability. So be sure to check those out. And then personally, you should also have a budget in your personal life. It might be worth bringing that over into your business life too. So if you are looking at different methods to pay down debt, like snowball or avalanche methods, become familiar with those and apply them as well. I've cut back expenses such as house cleaners and other unnecessary things. They're nice to haves, but we're at a point where some of those things are not valuable right now. They're kind of luxuries. So you might have to suck it up a bit and do some cleaning yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's also important as well as looking at what your expenses are is really paying attention to your accounting software and what you're doing with it in accounting. Like make sure you're updating that stuff so you know where you're being profitable, you know where maybe your expenses are going up a little bit. Like a perfect example is we know with tariffs and things like that, I have seen a increase in paper costs and printing costs because the paper is coming from usually Canada in a lot of cases or other places, and then plates are coming in from overseas that are costing printers more money, so they have to pass that cost on to us, which then unfortunately means I have to pass that cost on to my customers. And I have a choice in how I do that, whether I pass the full amount on or I pass a portion of it. But those are the kind of things that I think, as well as looking at what your expenses are, it's really taking a really good look at your accounting and having a really good accounting system so that you know what's going on. So both Carl and I are heavily into using Wave app as the accounting software we use. Part of that is there's no monthly expense with that. The only thing that they're charging me is when I take a payment online. The fee is a little bit higher than some of the other ones, but then I don't pay a monthly fee for the software. Now, I know there's some other stuff that you pay for with Wave apps that you could explain to people what you're doing with that.
So I actually pay to have Wave apps help me do my bookkeeping, and it's charged based off the number of transactions a month. And that's one of those expenses where I've talked to my CPA, which is a different person, and said, hey, should I be doing these myself? Because the amount that I'm putting in, here, I gave her the number and she said, that is pretty steep. We can coach you on how to do bookkeeping cleanly. And, at the end of the year, you just can work with us to reconcile everything. So I'm actually going to be dropping my Wave Apps bookkeeping expense because it's far more than it needs to be. And I've got the time to look at it. And I think it's going to make me better with how I spend my money because I'll have eyes in on it while I'm reconciling all that.
So I was listening to a really interesting podcast. It had, I think his name is Brownlee, Marcus Brownlee. He's MKBHD, which he's a tech review podcast. He's a huge YouTuber. But what I thought was interesting that he was talking about is he has this concept of the octopus. And he was talking about that as a small business owner, or even a solopreneur, we tend to put all our tentacles out and do everything. And I think that sometimes we're so worried about the expenses and so worried about what it costs to hire somebody that sometimes we don't hire soon enough. And so, yes, I'm a solopreneur, but I do hire contractors. Like you work with a CPA, I work with a bookkeeper. So we have other people that we work with. There may not necessarily be employees. Eventually they could be if we decide to go that route. But I just thought it was interesting that he talked about the fact that he kind of waited too long to let go of some of those things and wished he had earlier. And it's funny because we did this really cool thing at the unconference, which is called the Gauntlet. And what it is you come into a room, the person leading the room tells you what the gauntlet is. You basically write down a couple questions that you want to ask another business owner, and you line up. Say there's 15 people or 16 people, you line up with 8 on one side, 8 on the other, and you literally step forward and you ask each other the questions. And the idea is it's very fast, it's very rapid, and it's to get you answers quickly to something you may be wondering. And so one of the things I asked the guy that was in front of me, John, I said, so what is one thing that you wish you had known earlier on when you were running your business? And he said, that I needed to hire sooner. And I thought that was really interesting because that kind of goes with what Marcus is talking about too. And so while I think it's important to keep an eye on those expenses, sometimes we may need to hire somebody to help us with some of this stuff. And whether that's part-time, whether that's a contractor, whether that's full-time, you need to audit that as well. So if you do hire somebody and you bring it on, you need to kind of take a look at what they're providing in value and making sure that what you're paying for that is giving you that value. Now, obviously with Marcus being such a huge YouTuber, he had to find people that could fit into his team to help him grow and help him develop more channels, develop more content, things like that. But I thought his octopus analogy was really interesting because I think we all feel like that as small business owners, as solopreneurs, that we've just got our hands in everything. And I just thought I would bring that up because I listened to that before we got on to this podcast, and I just thought it was really interesting. And so I'll link to that podcast that he did with a gentleman named John, and I'll clip the part that he talks about with being an octopus and why it's important to maybe sometimes cut off one of those arms and let somebody else take that over.
I definitely plan on taking that to heart. I do want to have a bookkeeper, but I think that like a quarterly look at my books might be better than this month to month.
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to gauge that. And then sometimes it might work that way. Sometimes you're like, I really think I feel better if I go month to month. And it's with all of these things, with software, with hiring people, bringing in new tech, or having that new phone. It's like you really have to gauge what is the value you're getting from those things, and are you getting the value that you're paying? And while we always feel like we're paying more than we should, that's always the question of whether you're paying what you should or you're paying too much. Like I know we all complain about Adobe. We all complain about the fact that that has gone up and up and up and up. But unfortunately, in some ways, they have a stranglehold on us because we've used their software for so long that we kind of just have to realize that that's an expense as part of our business. And we have to realize that we got to keep an eye on it. We don't want it to be outrageous and be paying. Like I don't use some of the Apples because I can use Premiere. I don't need to pay for Final Cut Pro as well. Now, would I love to use Final Cut Pro because it's, I think, a much more powerful tool? Absolutely. But I don't do enough video to make that justification. So I will stay with Premiere that's part of the Adobe suite. So it's making those decisions as a business owner to say, okay, am I getting the value out of what I'm subscribed to? Am I keeping an eye on things that I'm not getting subscribed to too many mastermind groups or too many courses and things like that? Because you can fall into that pit of learning all the time and not doing. And so again, you just got to keep an eye on. That's something we could talk about in a future podcast about what I look at as creation over consumption. And so we'll bring that up at another date because I think that's a really good topic too.
Now, do you think we should save this for another topic? But there is the other side of this coin. How do we justify our rates? And are we an expendable resource as creatives, or are we consultants? What more do we bring to the table? That could be another podcast, but we could also talk about that now too.
Yeah, let's touch on it briefly because I know you and I have talked about this where we've been going into meetings and into rooms that we feel very much more like a consultant than just a designer. And I'll share briefly a story that's a perfect example. I met with a woman who was sent to me as a referral, and she wants to start doing subscription boxes. Now, I was presented to her as a marketer, so she didn't just come to me and say, hey, I need these boxes printed. She came to me and said, hey, I have this idea. I want to bounce some stuff off of you. So that became much more of a consulting meeting than it did and more of a discovery meeting than it did like, hey, I need this printed. And so it's been interesting because you and I have been trying to figure out how do we fall into that role more? Because I think we both enjoy helping our clients not just print a business card and a brochure, but put together an overall package that makes them successful in marketing. And so that's an example that I had that I felt like really fit that consultant mold. Yes, I'm looking into printing the boxes, and that's my print design side, but we had an hour meeting that the boxes was like maybe 2 or 3 minutes worth of that conversation. So do you have an example of something similar to that?
One's a common question that comes up, like people ask, how much is the logo? Well, I'm not in the business of just logos. I'm in the business of making your visual brand system. So when you need a logo, you're buying 3 different concepts, pretty standard, 2 rounds of revisions, and then the suite of stuff that's going to come with it. And people are asking for $300 logos, or $50 logos. Go to Upwork. There's enough logo work out there where their max budget is $50, and you'll see that they've spent tens of thousands on Upwork. It's like, how many people can you exploit? Talking about what we do with the logo, we're creating something that's unique, that can be trademarked. We're considering the whole brand, your target audience. We're bringing our visual expertise to make you look professional, not just someone that's amateur hour or buying pre-made stuff online. And then we can help implement it. You want to make sure that what's created by us can be delivered everywhere, online, printed, etched or embroidered like logos. So we bring our expertise in that, and justifying that cost is easier with some people, but then there's others that they're just on a shoestring. And, at that point, you can either scale down the services, you're still going to charge what you need for that time in that project, but you're not going to get as much as you typically do. It's like different tiered projects. Or you can say, I know someone that can help you out. Maybe they're a student or maybe they're an intern, that kind of thing. With experience and expertise comes a cost that can be justified as well.
So to kind of bring it full circle, I think one of the ways as marketers, as creatives, as solopreneurs and business owners, we can prevent from being a budget cut is to be front and center with our existing clients. We'll talk about that in a different podcast as well, but I think that's a really good way to not become slashed by the red pen, is to continue to add value to what you supply your clients, to communicate with your clients, and to make sure that they understand why you work with them and why they hired you. I think that's super important, and that they're going to go through the same thing. Like they're going to have budget cuts. They're going to have bigger budgets. And a perfect example is I have a nonprofit that I work with that when their budget comes around for my services for the year, I make sure to have that conversation with the executive director that this is what I'm going to offer you. This is what I've done so far for you. I can ask for an increase in budget, or I can say, hey, what are you planning on doing for a budget? And so some years it's like, hey, we got to cut back. Like I do through a newsletter. We got to cut back and do one less newsletter this year. Okay, I understand, but I'm not losing the whole contract to the red pen because I'm communicating with those clients. So again, to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier about expenses, your clients are going to have expenses as well. Communicate with them, be honest with them, and ask them how things are going. And if you start to see that shift, be prepared. Be prepared. Maybe something will happen and you will have to not work with them for a while or not work with them going forward. You could end up being a budget cut, but being front and center can help prevent that from happening.
Right.
So not to cut us short, but I do have a meeting shortly, as you know. But as always, we want to do our PodDecks question for this episode. And today's question is, which celebrity chef would you most like to make you dinner?
Probably the original Iron Chef. Bo would have to be on the stage of Iron Chef too. It's got to be dynamic. I forget his name.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure what his... I know who you're talking about, but I cannot remember what his name is either. But that would be interesting to do it actually on the stage.
I want to be there when they shout I cuisine and all that, and I want to sit and grade those meals and be the guest. I won't be a celebrity guest, but yeah.
So mine is actually Gordon Ramsay. And the reason for that is I watched the new Netflix series Being Gordon Ramsay, and I want specifically to go and eat in the new restaurant that he opened in this giant tower in London. And it's basically being recognized as the highest restaurant in the area. He poured a ridiculous amount of money into it. But what I found really interesting is to see the other side of him, to see the non-chef side of him, and also to see the businessman in him. That was kind of cool too. But to see the family side of him and to see the way he was with his kids and his wife, it's still Gordon. It's still like the crazy guy that he is, but it's so interesting to see that part of his personality where he's loving and caring with his children and not the guy that's screaming and yelling at the chefs in the kitchen. but also the business side, where when he was trying to get this restaurant up and going, the stress and the concerns that he had to go through. But the reason I would love to have him cook is not only would I want to have him make dinner for me, I would really hope that he would be able to sit down and have a conversation with me, because I just find him extremely fascinating. And the world he has built around him is absolutely crazy and amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we're going to end it there. And it's another good episode. And as always, first of all, I hate saying this, but please like and subscribe on YouTube. I hate being that guy. And please make sure you do that. We will be putting these out up on YouTube. They will also be in your favorite podcast app. If you go to CreavoCast.com, you'll find all the icons for all the different podcast apps there that you could subscribe to us. And then also please share this with other people and let them know that we're out there. And as always, we'll see you soon. Talk to you later. Thanks, Carl.
Take care. You're welcome. Bye.